Hi everyone, today we're starting things off by grabbing some resources. My resource pack conveniently changes a bunch of blocks you wouldn't usually use, but this does come with one catch, which is that those items are usually pretty tough to get your hands on. So I'm over here in the nether, getting some various warped items. I also headed out to the nearest cherry biome to cut down some trees. You see, recently I swapped out the texture I had for acacia planks to use cherry planks instead, as I find the orange acacia planks more useful on their own than cherry. This meant I needed to get my hands on a bunch of cherry wood, so that's what you see me doing right here. I actually chose this spot in my world because I was effectively able to kill two birds with one stone. You see, it's visible on the world map and a bit of an eyesore, so once I'd finished up I was able to head over to my world map temple and update the map. So it's now looking very clean. Fortunately, I hadn't used this new texture that much in my world yet, so I had very little to replace. I was also able to straight away put the warped blocks to use, alongside many others, as I started adding texture to the riverbed, which wasn't able to be finished in the previous episode. This included adding patches of gravel, dirt and clay, and then detailing up the remaining bits of rock and stonework with some andesite, dead brain coral blocks and tuff. I also added a bunch of vegetation down here with your typical kelp and seagrass, but I also added some spruce leaves and mangrove roots to represent some larger, denser plant life. Alright, well, a handful of details have now been added throughout the city, and so I think it's time we walk through together and just check them all out. It's actually been a minute since I created these, as you would have noticed between the last video and this video there has been a slightly longer gap, and that's just because I've been quite busy doing other things, and so throughout my bits of spare time I've just been coming through and adding in details. And one of the first things I did is I approached the riverbed, as that was something I wasn't able to finish in the last video. Now, I didn't want to go too extreme with this because, especially when using shaders, the water's quite reflective and you don't really see too much of it. However, I still wanted it to be pretty dang good, and as one of my viewers mentioned, it would make a lot more sense for the riverbed to be made out of gravel and dirt and things rather than stone. And that is a very good point, and so you can see I've kind of painstakingly gone through and just replaced the majority of those blocks for gravel ones, which I think looks a lot better. In hindsight, I probably should have thought of this beforehand, but at least I know what to do for the future. And so that includes all of the different stair and slab variants that I use the warped blocks for, which really makes for a nice detailed look, along with the dirt ones here as well. And so we also have bits of stone sticking out here and there, some areas larger than others, and those have also been textured with some andesite, coral blocks, and things like that. And then throughout the rest of it, we just have patches of clay and different foliage and things like that, which all together creates this really lovely detailed out riverbed, which I'm now quite happy with. Now that we're above the water, I have also added a few more viewer suggested details. I believe a few people actually mentioned I should add drain pipes to the city. Now, I really wanted one that actually has water coming out of it, so I went for this kind of full block style here using my cherry trapdoors. And I think this looks pretty convincing. The only annoying thing is you get this ring of the gravel blocks in there, which isn't quite ideal, so I may tweak this in the future, but I still think this is a fun detail. I have two of them here, and similar to the drain pipes coming off of the bridge, it just shows that, you know, all of the water runoff or sewage is in fact flowing into this river here. And then another thing that I did is I tried to mix up some of this rock work. Of course, from up close it looks really nice and textured, but from far away it can start to look a little bit grey. So the idea was to just mix up some sections with some darker bits to help it stand out from a distance. And this is kind of my temporary solution. So I'll explain to you my thought process for this. I didn't want to use anything like blackstone because that would just be way too dark. And so I settled with the kind of block palette I used for the structures I'm building, which makes it stand out, which is things like tuff and cobblestone, which are just a little bit darker. And honestly, I think this could work, but you can see that we've only got cobblestone for the stairs and slabs right now, which just makes it look a little bit weird. Now fortunately, in a future update we are going to get some tough stairs and slabs, and that means that this whole section can kind of have an extra layer of detail in the future, and so I think I'll sort of revisit this and tweak it, and it should end up looking pretty dang good. Finally, whilst I'm up here, you'll notice that there are now a lot more patches of grass and bushes and weeds and things poking up through the rocks to yet again add a little bit more detail, but also just add a little bit of colour to this area which I felt it needed before. And now I think I'm very happy with this rock work, and I'm going to leave this and start working on some new projects. This brings us to the two towers. Now you may remember I was planning on adding in some entranceways, and though it was pretty tough on the diagonal, this is what I've managed to come up with here, and I'm pretty happy with it. This side is looking pretty good, but I especially love the one on the other tower, as this side on the ground level is slightly lower, and although I originally intended on just having a lower door, I thought it would be really fun to have this staircase here, as it just adds a little bit more style to this side. And so this is what you would have seen me walking up and down at the very start. And yeah, we've just got a little barrel up here, and altogether I think this came out pretty nicely. Now the other thing that I did in between the two towers here is I finally added in the defense mechanism. And so the idea here, which has remained the same as what I mentioned previously, is that to stop any incoming ships from sailing through, you'll have some kind of a chain here with like a net hanging below that can be pulled tight just above the height of the water level here, which is basically going to get caught on any of the holes of the boats and stop them from coming through. And so you'll also need a mechanism that pulls it through tight and sort of raises this dangling chain up above. And so to one side on the interior, we're definitely going to need some kind of a mechanism in there. And that is exactly what I'd like to do now. I'd like to fit in the interiors. So as we walk on in here, you can see that we have the spiral staircase coming down, but we have not added anything else yet, except for a couple lights, as I have made a couple of plans, but it's not quite set in stone just yet. So the concept here remains the same as the kind of idea I had when I first started making the top interior section, which is the guards of course are going to be kind of staking out this location over here, and so they have a little area to kind of relax over in at the top, sit down and things like that. But as we get below, we're going to need a location for the archers around these locations to hang out, maybe with some spare bows and arrows, and then below that perhaps we'll have some kind of a storage area on these towers. And on this side where we're going to have the mechanism coming through over here, I think we need some kind of a system that's going to help us pull that chain nice and tight. And so I'm going to start getting to work on putting together this interior here, and we'll see how this thing turns out. Alright, let me share with you a closer look at what I just made there, as I'm sure in the time lapse it's a little bit cramped and it may have been hard to spot all of the details. So on the very top floor here, this is where we're going to have the arches. And so through here we of course have the arrow slits that have been made. And then I've placed in these few pillars to separate that section off from the rest, as well as sort of a little pillar here. I tried to add a couple of supports to kind of depict some kind of structural integrity in here, as all of this stone I imagine would be very heavy. And then of course we have the spiral staircase going down, which does enable you to move between the two floors, because of course the door is just a little bit higher, so that gave me the opportunity to come in with some stone bricks and create this kind of shape around towards this side, which I actually think makes this floor one of my favourites. It's just a lot more interesting to walk around, and there's just a lot more design to it. And you could take this spiral staircase to move between them. However, I've also gone and added a sort of direct route between the door, which takes us straight down here, which I imagine would be very efficient and easy for the soldiers to sort of walk up and down. And then around the place down here, we just have a couple of crates for some things like bows and arrows. We do have some weapons on the walls, so they've got their arrows to shoot. And then I've used some of my coal barrels here to maybe represent some rocks that you could throw out, or even maybe use something like a slingshot. And then yeah, we've just got a few tables, some bits of armor. I've got a little bit of storage over here. I had some fun over on this part of the wall. I thought I'd place a fitting for what would represent maybe another light, and then I just have the soul lantern, which is my sort of unlit lantern, off to one side to show that that one's not really in use. And then over on this side we just have another small table as well, and that pretty much does it for this floor. One thing I did do, if we just quickly take a peek up top here, is I actually went and changed the ceiling from dark oak planks or slabs over to the new cherry slabs, just to get the darker texture and make it consistent with this floor, as that was something that I wanted to use down here. Alright, let's head on downstairs and check out the lower floor. So as you can see immediately, this is a storage room, and so we've got loads of different crates and boxes and chests and shelving and just random bits and bobs to store the various things that you may need in a guard tower like this. And who knows, maybe this tower hasn't been used in that long, maybe they haven't had a battle in a while and it really is just used as a storage room because it's a bit derelict. Either way, I think this place is looking really cool. There's even a few beds down here with a little bit of food for the soldiers if one of them wants to take a break or something like that. And then yeah, over on this side I did a little bit of a sort of a rack for tools and weapons. I mean, it's very limited as to what you can do in vanilla Minecraft, but I think this does the job. And then we've got things like more boxes and crates full of arrows, so that's sort of what this side represents here. And then this one is just your sort of standard crates, and in this section we have some sort of standing shelves here with various things in. I used the pressure plate to kind of represent a lid for this small basket. And then yeah, as for the structural integrity down here, we have this kind of split off wall section, which just adds a little bit of compartmentation, is that a word? Something like that. And so you can see that there's just a couple of different sections down here. And as you get to the bottom of these staircases, you can see it just ends with a couple more crates, as on this side that's just about it. But as we head on over to the other side, you'll notice I did something slightly different. And by the way, in case you was wondering what these are actually a custom texture in my resource pack, which changes the potted spruce sapling into a small little barrel. And that's what I've done in some various other places where you see some small details like this. But you see over on this side, it's effectively the same on the first two floors, it's just been mirrored, and so it's all looking rather familiar. However, as we walk on down here, you'll notice that this staircase does in fact continue going downwards, and so instead of some crates, we have a little bit more railing around the edge here, and this takes us into the kind of mechanic room which controls the chain over in between the two towers. And so this is the mechanism that I sort of came up with here. Again, in vanilla, it's very challenging to create small detailed things like this, but I think I've managed to create something here which represents something somewhat believable. And so the concept is you do of course have the chain with the netting below, and that chain can be pulled tighter, and so we've got like a kind of swivel round wheel here which could wind up the chain, and a couple of soldiers could push these sort of handles and spin that around to twist the chain around, and I think that's a fairly decent enough job. I use some arm stands as a kind of support for the chain there, and around the corners I wasn't sure if I should really just leave some gaps or use the wither skulls here. I'm kind of undecided. I liked the idea of being clever and using some skulls, so I kind of just went with that for now. You may remember I actually used to have these be the texture of a small log. I changed those to be some different flower pot methods instead, and that's because I wanted to get the original texture back, as when I changed it, unfortunately it came with the unavoidable side effect of actually changing the entity itself, and I wanted to kind of preserve that, and so these are back to the default texture, and that's what I used there. But over on this side I just have a little bit of storage for some sets of armor. Perhaps you could call this the armory down here, and yeah, so I just threw on some different bits of armor. I even used up my last netherite ingot so that we can get a pretty cool gladiator looking helmet here. And throughout you'll notice that I've used a couple of lightning rods, and so in my resource pack I actually changed this to be the orange copper over to the green, as I just find that there's a couple more uses for me. I originally intended to use these as spires for something like copper roofs, but I found that they worked really quite nicely as some copper piping, and I figured since we're down here in the lower section it would make sense to have some stuff like that. And so yeah, I just have a few other bits and bobs lying around, but otherwise the final thing I added is this small staircase that leads up to one final arrow slit right at the bottom here. If anyone sneaks out of their boat and tries to get past, we've got our bow here and we can make sure not a soul gets into this city. And so yeah, that's just about it for all of the interiors over in these towers. One final thing that I would like to highlight is you may have actually spotted these torches. These are not the default torches, these are in fact my soul torches, and I've given them this texture here just to create some variation. So it means that we still get to use that default torch, which is nice, but since you wouldn't usually use any blue torches in places, I think this is another great addition, and it fits in really nicely in areas like this. Alright, well with those few bits out of the way here in the city, it's time to move on to the final project for today, which is going to be putting together a redstone contraption. Now you see, in the future I'd quite like to use a couple of mob heads in my builds. You can see there that I like to use my wither skeleton skulls. I already have a farm for that, but all of the others are pretty challenging to get your hands on, and there's even the piglin head, which I haven't even gotten yet, which I still need for my storage system. And so what I would like to do is put together a farm that can collect all of these, which has only recently been possible to put together fully automatically thanks to the use of lightning rods, which I know aren't that new, but they're fairly new. Finding the right location for this build is actually going to be a little bit challenging, and that's because it requires it to be built in some specific biomes, kind of. You see, over in the overworld there is a mob farm, and you want to make sure that this is efficient, and the best way of doing this in my view is building it above an ocean. You could of course always make a perimeter or spawn proof the area or something like this, but that just takes a very long time, and so what we need is a ocean over in the overworld, and because this connects to the nether, we then need it to connect to a nether waste biome in order to spawn the piglins that we need. And so I've managed to find a small patch of nether wastes here. There's a lot of other biomes around, but fortunately this one is connected to my ocean. Now my world does have a lot of oceans, so that does in fact help, and as you can see I've placed this portal in the location I'll be needing it. And so I've already gone and collected up some of the resources I need, and so what I'm going to do now is jump back over to the nether and start actually putting together the nether side first, as it's a lot simpler, and then as I'll explain in a moment, we need to put together the monstrosity that is over in the overworld as well. I'll be explaining how all of this works very shortly, but whilst I'm putting this together I'd like to point out who originally designed this masterpiece, and it is in fact another design by Ray Works. This is a really ingenious concept as it combines so many game mechanics to make this work, and honestly I never thought it was possible until I actually looked this up on YouTube. And basically the way this works is it takes advantage of a channeling trident that's infinitely striking a lightning rod, and so this is pretty much only possible to build ever since that mechanic got introduced. But unfortunately, the design that he shares on his channel doesn't work in this version anymore. Conveniently, just the version I'm in, it doesn't work on anymore. And since I just updated my world, that is a little bit irritating. But I suppose it's a good thing because it means I can future-proof this right away. And so what I did is I headed over to a creative world and I tried to figure out what wasn't working, and I finally found a fix. As it always is, you come up with 100 complicated designs, and then by the end you find a simple little thing you can do and you think, oh, I could have done that from the start. But fortunately it's a nice little simple fix, and I've now got this thing working. And so of course, if you want to download his version, as always, it's always available on his channel. But then I've also got my version of the world download and the kind of schematics where I've updated some of the block palette to make it a little simpler to build in survival, along with my fix that I've implemented, which will all be available in the description. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and build this up, and then I'll share with you how this thing works. Once I'd finished doing all of the little bits that you need to do to set up this farm, I was able to AFK at the very top and let the mob farms fill itself up with all of the different mobs. Alright, well before I turn this thing on, I think I'll give you a brief explanation of how this contraption works, as at first glance it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. There's all kinds of weird things going on here. So it all starts down here at the bottom, and that is of course because we need to spawn a bunch of different mobs to make this thing work. So we need the creepers to be turned into charged creepers, and then we need all of the different types of mobs to get killed by those charged creepers to get the heads that we need. And that's also what the nether side is. It's literally just a farm to get those mobs over here so that we can use them. And so below we have a very simple sort of detection system that will pick them up with minecarts and then send them up this bubble column. Now this goes all the way up here. You could make this even taller if you like, and as you can see it's full of mobs, and this is just to stock them up so that when a lightning storm comes our way, we do in fact have all of the mobs we need on hand and ready. And so what we have down here is a little contraption. You'll notice that we have a lightning rod. Now usually there would be a trident with channeling on top of this, and it's moving to stop it from despawning, as of course it's an entity. And basically the second we get a lightning storm, it will go ahead and strike this. It will detect that it's been struck, and it will turn this whole thing into farming mode. And what will happen is the lightning will repeatedly strike this trident here, and the range in which it can do damage, the lightning strike, is actually quite large. It reaches all the way up here, and it just about reaches these two, which is going to cause them to pop out of their minecarts. And if it's a creeper, it will turn it into a charged creeper. And so right now, of course, we have 2 creepers. This one would be charged, this one would be 2, but that doesn't really matter. He's just, oh gosh. Okay, so he can actually see me. He's just gonna fall down there so that he can get blown up, and that will just give us a regular creeper head, or whatever the mob is. And then on the left, the charged creeper will fall down over towards this section over here. And okay. Okay, I think I'm in a safe spot here. What we've got going on is a skeleton trying to shoot that iron golem, and that is so that he can hit the creeper when it falls down here, causing it to explode. And basically that is going to cause a little bit of damage to this skeleton, and to avoid it dying, we have some weakness potions falling down here, which, because it's an undead mob, will actually heal it. And the way we're getting these weakness potions is we're using a witch, and due to the specific mechanics that it has, if it's shooting at a mob that has a certain amount of health, that's at a certain distance, that's being, aggro at it, it will try and hit it with a weakness potion every time. And using this water, we can make sure that he doesn't harm the golem here, and we can specifically get it to fall just where we need it. It's a very clever mechanic, and that's how we're able to create this infinite automated cycle of blowing up the charged creepers repeatedly. And then what we have down here, try and make sure these creepers don't explode on me, is we have a lever which will basically stop these guys from falling down and enable the nether mobs to come through and literally just take their place. And that means that instead of getting the regular heads, we'll get the piglin heads. And so this is basically the bit that I had to fix, because of course this farm was not working in this version. And the bit that broke is that when the mobs got ejected out of the minecarts, they didn't go where they were meant to. And so I had to kind of rework the system that moves them around. But fortunately, in the end, I was able to find a fairly simple fix. And now this thing should be working. And so I think it's time to get our hands on this trident, as I don't want to use my ones that I have, but rather I want to get a brand new one just for this farm. And to do this, we're going to head over to my drowned farm. And so we're just going to fly on through the portal here. Now, in case you was wondering what these two guys are in the boat in the minecart, they're actually here to push the entities out of the portal when they get here, which is a pretty cool little mechanic. But what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly jump out of here, and I'll also quickly explain to you how this simple piglin farm works. It's a platform up here which is covered in soul torches, and they are in fact afraid of these, and so it's going to use them to filter them down, align them, and then get them in just the right spot. And then on the edges here we also have some turtle eggs, which I believe the regular zombie pigmen are attracted to, and when they jump down here to try and get them, because of the specific height that we're at when AFKing this, they are actually going to despawn just at the last second, which is pretty handy. And so it's just going to filter out the specific mobs we need. And then with the help of this clock here, it's going to stay chunk loaded over on the other side, and also give them a golden carrot. But I believe that feature is only for multiplayer, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. So what we need to do now is fly on over to 00. So here is our portal, which will take us to the storage system, and then from here we can fly in this direction, and this is where our very first house is, as well as the mob switch, which I have turned off so that we can get all those mobs to spawn. And hopefully in this direction we should find our drowned farm that we made in the very first episode. Alright, I'm starting to recognise this terrain. And there's the big shadow, here it is. So this is just a massive volume of water to get them to spawn and fall down over here. And you'll notice I've been doing a little bit of grinding over here, and I have gotten my hands on a handful of items, including a trident. And so I'm also going to take these bits, which are very useful, but now we just need to get some channeling on here, and we can throw it into the farm. So we're back in the nether. Let's fly on up to my pigman gold farm and see if we can get this thing straight away. Should have some lapis here. Let's go ahead and turn that into lazuli and see what we get. Oh, look at that, first try. And no, it's got loyalty on it. Oh, that sucks. Okay, let's put this in the grindstone. That's kind of ironic, actually. Try one more time. Ah, loyalty again with the channeling. That is frustrating. Okay, well I've now run out of that lapis, so let's keep on going. This is turning out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. It really doesn't want to give me what I want here. Ah, there we go. You see, you have to say it's not working for it to work. So we now have the trident we need, and okay, I need to craft these back up. I believe there's a crafting table here somewhere. Ah, there we go. It's a little hidden crafting table on the corner there. So I'm going to put these in and we're going to head back. Ah, and here we go. This is actually the first time I've seen some pigmen spawn, and they're going to go ahead and fall down here, because when we AFK at the very top, they will actually despawn, and then the mobs we do want will head on into this direction. Alright, so now all I have to do is build on up here with my ender chests, and I should just have to throw it against this and it's not going to go anywhere. And so I just need to wait for a lightning storm now. Unfortunately, that can happen around every 9 hours on average in your world, so I've got a little bit of AFKing to do. And finally, a lightning storm struck, and I'm happy to say that all of the components of this farm worked perfectly. However, I would say that the creeper spawning side of it is a little bit slow for my liking, so I may potentially expand that section if I plan on using this a lot in the future. But otherwise, even over in the nether, everything worked without error. And so I was finally able to get my hands on the piglin heads and add them to my storage system, which means now I believe I only have the frog lights left to put in there, which funny enough aren't even that hard to get my hands on. I just haven't got round to doing it, as I'd like to make a farm for it in the future. But anyways, that finishes off all of the projects that I had planned for today's video.